Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Holy Humanist. Today, I am extremely excited because it seldom happens on this channel where I get to interview another female activist who uses her real name and shows her face and is able to have a raw, unfiltered discussion with me. So, as promised, and without further ado, I would like to introduce my guest for today. Her name is Maral Selmassi. Maral grew up across Iran, Jordan, and Israel. Her father worked for the Shah's regime. Her mother taught literature. From a young age, she was surrounded by politics, language, and movement, all the things that shape a person long before they find their voice. She's a sound engineer by profession, a media artist, and now one of the loudest voices calling out both the brutality of Islamic fundamentalism and the silence of the West. This episode is not just a conversation, it's a confrontation. It's a mirror, it's a challenge to all of us, especially women, to stop asking for permission and start speaking your truth. Let's get into it. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome Maral to Holy Humanist. Hi, Maral.
Hi, thanks for having me, Nuria.
Thank you so much for being here. I'm honestly so excited to get stuck into this conversation with you. But yes, welcome and welcome to all the viewers who are watching. Maral, before your activism, before the art, there was just a girl growing up, being raised across battle lines, if you will, trying to find her place in the world that at some points made no space for her. So, if we were to rewind to the beginning of your story, you were born into a very politically complex situation. And as I mentioned, you grew up between Iran, Jordan, and Israel. So, how do you even begin to form a stable identity amongst that kind of storm?
Very early on, I understood something fundamentally wrong with the Islamic world. I had direct comparison. I knew the Iran I I knew Iran before the Islamic Revolution in 1979, and I witnessed firsthand how millions of women lost their basic human rights overnight. Before the disastrous revolution, my family and I lived in Jordan, as you mentioned. My father worked as a diplomat for the Shah. After the regime was overthrown, we stayed a little while, around 1.5 years more, in Jordan, waiting for the elections. At the time, Khomeini was seen as a temporary figurehead, so to speak. None of the useful communists and credulous Iranians, useful communist idiots and credulous Iranians who helped topple the Shah, imagined that Khomeini would seize power, execute thousands, and impose Sharia law. When we eventually returned to Iran, we stayed at my grandfather's house for a few months while my parents were looking for a home. It was during this time that I had the first experience that would profoundly change my relationship to religion, especially Islam. And one evening, my grandfather described vivid detail how women who fail to cover themselves and obey Allah would be punished and burn in hell, etc. That night, I was lying in bed and crying because I was afraid. How old? I was probably 6 or 7, and I was super afraid, crying and thinking about all the sins and how I would burn in hell. And then suddenly something like a switch just flipped, and I thought, if this is God, then I hate him, and I don't care what he wants. The next day, I told my father about this incident, and he told me to ignore my grandfather and don't bring up this topic anymore. What made the whole experience even more absurd was that my grandmother, his late grandmother, she had already passed. She never wore a hijab, or she never prayed. She drank alcohol, she smoked, She was pretty secular, and that my grandfather has had changed so much was shocking to me just after the revolution. And the second formative experience was came from the maternal side. It it took some time before I could see my grandmother truly how she was. Like many submissive Muslim women, she had developed a kind of calculated, cunning way to survive. Until this incident, I had loved her dearly, which then changed. We were on a holiday trip to northern Iran at the Caspian Sea, and I was probably 8 or 7 or 8 and playing outside with a teenage boy, the son of a friend of my parents. And then I came back to the house and she slapped me across the face and called me a harlot. I told my
Oh,
parents it was
wow.
shocking because I trusted her so much. I loved her. I never expected her to betray me like she did. And my father was furious. He spoke with her. It was they were fighting and in the kitchen, and she apologized. But something inside me was completely broken, and it never recovered. I never trusted her again, and the incident only reinforced what I was thinking already, that something was deeply structurally wrong with Islam. It brought, in my view, or when I think about how I felt at the time, it brought the worst. I thought it brought the worst brought the worst out of everyone I knew. People who once I considered kind and caring were suddenly callous and weird, just weird. The revolution twisted them into something else.
Oh, no, that's insane how it takes something like an ideology fueled by a revolution like the one you described in Iran to overnight almost, or like the flick of a switch, completely change people's, I guess, an entire like internal makeup and their
Yeah,
actual mentality. And as you said, like, experiencing that as a child, that would of course end up being a formative memory that you are going to link that with Islam, quote unquote, forever. And I'm not saying that's even a wrong association to make because that is reality of life under an Islamic theocracy.
absolutely. And I think, I don't know what it is about faith, because if Shah would have remained, they would have developed in an entirely different direction than with Islam. So it is spiritually, it has a very weird grip on people. It's dark. In my view, it is dark because it doesn't make them happy. It makes people
Oh, yeah.
miserable.
I often repeat a quote that I say, which is what I genuinely felt, even as a child, and especially since I became an ex Muslim, is that Islam
Yeah,
sucks all the joy out of life.
yeah,
Really, it
absolutely.
does.
Yeah,
The joy and the beauty of life, things here that we take for granted. You delve into kind of
yeah,
music production and things like that yourself, so you know how dear these things are to the fabric of any society. And Islam just comes and tries to wipe the slate clean of all of that and have us living exactly how you just described a snippet of your childhood.
yeah.
It is extremely dark, as you're saying. I always, even with, if anybody's watched The Handmaid's Tale, I picture that, but a bit
Yes,
more even on steroids for what
yes, it is.
theocracy really is like.
It speaks to the fears and the worst things that people carry around. So instead of healing them, I don't know, it makes it worse. It makes the trauma worse, or it's just it's just not helping us as humans to evolve.
Oh, yeah. In fact, it's regressive in
It's
nature.
regressive.
It's
Yeah.
taking you back to further than the Dark Ages because
Yeah.
it's setting a perfect scene which is rife for abuse, or
Yeah.
all kinds of abuse. And as you said,
Yeah. And
absolutely
it gives
no
you all the
spiritual fulfillment in that.
no, and it gives you all the excuses to be callous, to be ruthless, to be cruel. And this is the experience with my grandmother. She was cruel. A person I
Yeah.
thought was a loving, nice, cuddly grandma was all of a sudden ice cold and cruel.
And judge you and
Yeah,
just set boundaries for you that you would never have set for yourself. Boundaries that you had to go to your parents to have make sense of what just happened.
yeah. I was lucky that my parents weren't religious. They were, in fact, atheists. But I can imagine, I can only try to imagine how it is if you have to grow up with parents who are like my grandma. That's terrible, terrible.
Exactly, because there's not even a safe space then for you to try and heal from that trauma or deal with the abuse that you're
Yeah,
facing because there's no safe space for you to go to. In fact, it's just a perpetual cycle.
yeah,
And you might end up thinking this is normal and continue that cycle, if you will. So I'm
yeah,
really grateful
absolutely.
as well that your parents were free thinkers in that sense.
Yeah, it is crazy. But you brought up, you just mentioned something very important. Escaping this self perpetuating cycle is so hard if your parents are fundamentalistic. I can only, I don't know, because you don't know anything else. You grow up and this is your reality. So people who break out of that, I have enormous respect for them.
No, absolutely. I think that's
Yeah,
the harder thing to do, in fact, because if your parents can break away from the mainstream thought
yeah,
pattern of Islam, you have a lot more chance of potentially exploring those avenues yourself or having the courage to maybe explore it. Whereas otherwise, you're fighting the people closest to you, like intellectually, and that's just very difficult to do, especially given everything else that comes with leaving Islam, the societal backlash, the internal policing, the moral edicts to be killed if you leave the faith in the
that
more
is,
extreme sense. But everything,
yeah, absolutely. That is another thing that is completely ignored here in the West. Death penalty on
yes.
apostasy. This is so cruel. It's actually, I don't know how people who consider themselves progressive and liberal can justify this and still side with Islamists. Because it is, I cannot imagine that they're oblivious to this. By now, everyone knows these things. They have been mentioned over and over online, all over the social media. So, how they can justify this is, it blows my mind.
Yeah, and I think people like you and myself and other activists and ex-Muslims have at least blown the lid off of that now and said, hey,
Yeah.
this is less like a religion and more some mafia situation where if you leave your religion or if you change your religion, then you are, as they call it, especially in different parts of the Middle East, the wajib al-qatl, like you are okay to be killed. There can be a bounty on your head. And it's almost, what level of bounty applies to you because one day one of those sheikhs or mullahs or whatever can put a fatwa on your head if in a country like Iran, if,
Oh, yeah.
Islamists are in power, it's just a matter of who
Yeah.
knows what you're saying and how susceptible are you to their threats because there are people who are willing to do their dirty work for them, which is why I have immense respect for again, people like yourself who are speaking out in the face
Yeah.
of those kind of dangers.
Yeah. And I
So
don't
Maral,
understand how,
just yeah, sorry, go ahead.
I just don't understand how our authorities can accept that these imams, they don't impose these fatwas only from Iran. They do it here too in the West. There are imams who do it here in
Yeah,
the West, and they do it with impunity, and no one cares. This is another problem. A lot of things need to change. We have the laws in Germany to actually address these, yeah, this type of religious barbarism. There is no other term for it.
Yeah.
But I feel like what's missing is the courage among politicians and the authorities to enforce the laws by which we all obey. But it seems that these laws don't apply to a certain group.
Yeah, we have very similar concerns here in the UK. People even say the term two-tier policing now and two-tier justice. But even if you were to receive death threats of a very serious nature, a lot of the times, because of all of this two-tier policing and two-tier justice, the police are just they turn around and say to you, sorry, unless something actually happens, we can't do anything. So it's almost just like reactive, quote unquote, justice. There's nothing even proactively being done to safeguard people who put their neck on the line. And as you said, within the law, use our freedom of speech to say things that are genuine truths, but you just feel sometimes as exposed as you would in a country that has genuine blasphemy laws, which is an extremely scary thought in 2025 Western
Mm.
Europe.
Yeah, absolutely. The UK has blasphemy laws, right? No. I heard
No, we
something
don't.
like
We don't. In theory,
there
we don't.
is
But
some
what we're
old,
seeing in practicalities,
oh, yeah, I see what you mean. But this whole thing is crazy. Humans crave identity. You can't erase the national identity of a nation. And this is what they try to do. And it's
yeah,
extremely dangerous. This is what I meant when I said they are walking a tightrope over over an erupting volcano right now here in Europe. Tolerance without reciprocity is it leads to submission, and young people are starting to understand
yes,
this. So this won't end well if they don't walk the talk. They actually should live their values here in the West, and they don't adhere to their own values, which is they betray their own values, and this is really frustrating. We, and I don't know how it did, not you because you'd never had war or anything in Pakistan, and I believe you were born in the UK, so you're actually British. I came as a refugee to Germany, so for me it is shocking to see that the forces I fled from to Europe are now here and
it's wild.
proliferating. It's and we can, particularly the Iranians, because we see this, we can observe the same dynamics here, the union of the left and the right, the left and the Islamists, and so on and so forth. For us, every red flag is on.
Yeah.
We
I
see,
actually want to get into that with you in a
yeah,
bit more detail
yeah.
as we go further on. But just to wrap up about where you were in that kind of mindset in Iran, just a quick one on did you ever, I know you said your parents were both atheists, but did you ever try and go back, take a second look at Islam yourself as you were growing up, or were you just done with the religion at that point because of what you were seeing around you and how things had unfolded?
My parents, as I said, were both outspoken atheists and never missed
Mm.
an opportunity to mock the Iranian clergy. Yet, when we came to Germany briefly, this is very interesting. I assume it happened because they felt isolated or something. They had a brief regression into faith, basically. It was fascinating for me to witness because my parents, they were never, it wasn't like they were practicing Islam, praying, or conservative, or anything like that, engaging in any religious rituals. They just identified all of a sudden as Muslims. And I think it was because, presumably driven by the feelings of isolation and the influence of an Arab and an Afghan family, they briefly, shortly after our arrival, befriended. After a year or so, luckily, they stopped the nonsense when they started working and speaking German and making German friends. So that brief period was over. But I found it fascinating how this, as an identity, this Islam is also an identity, almost like a national identity, right? So how this came up, and these outspoken atheists all of a sudden briefly considered themselves Muslims. And now imagine what it's like for people who already arrive with strong religious convictions and have to find their place in a Western society, right? The first thing they most likely do is look for the next mosque and
Turn more insular, exactly, yeah.
yeah, and connect with the Muslim community. But these Islamic networks are these self-reinforcing loops. They, instead of fostering integration, they isolate even more and often radicalize these communities. I think this is what I have observed in Germany, at least. I don't know how it is in the UK. I think it's very similar, and especially the young people now, which is crazy because their parents and their grandparents are more liberal Muslims, more moderate Muslims than they are now. These young generations are fundamentalists. It's crazy.
Oh, I'm so glad you brought that up because, for example, that was genuinely the same thing that happened to me. And I think you've hit on something really important there in terms of we do see examples and case studies, even anecdotally within our own families, of where
Yeah.
you can momentarily go a certain to the other side of the spectrum, if you will, or the pendulum swings.
Yeah.
But as you said, if I'm third generation now British Pakistani, so when my grandparents came to, what certain cousins of a similar age to me are, they are a lot more fundamental than my own grandparents who migrated here from Pakistan 2 generations ago. And I was very much
Yeah.
going down that same path until obviously life happened to me and I learned the truth about Sharia and did my own research. But exactly what you said, it's that need and desire for identity
Yeah.
in amongst a culture which you're told can't be yours. You're told you should be a bit wary of, and you're not supposed to integrate and assimilate fully, and you need to therefore express yourself in a certain way. And that, as you mentioned, what do? You end up going to the mosque more, you end up donning the hijab, you end up wanting to learn the Quran by heart and doing things to make you the other, at least
Yeah.
from a from a perspective where it's very visibly obvious that you are not of them.
Yeah.
But
But I
yeah,
think it's even more. Not for my parents, it was something else. My parents, I believe it was more the influence of these two families and feeling isolated. But I have observed other people and parents of friends, and I felt, for instance, a family, they were also Afghans. It was also envy. I believe that envy plays a huge role, feelings of inadequacy and envy for Muslims who come from, let's say, a less advanced culture, so to speak, or a country where, if you compare Afghanistan to Germany, of course, the standards are much higher here. People are more educated, etc., etc. So when they come, and even though they have studied or whatever, oops, sorry, they feel left out or inadequate somehow, or it's and Muslims have a huge ego. Is what I have observed over and over, particularly Muslim men. But they are also taught to, they are the chosen people, their culture is better, their religion is better, they are superior, their God is the most perfect and the only one, and everyone else are kuffars, etc., etc., etc. So it's probably also easier to justify this type of narcissism, cultural narcissism, to yourself, and then Islam provides every reason to you to hate the other culture. They
oh
are,
yeah,
anyway, they eat pork, they drink, they are
yeah.
inferior, and who are they to drive this car or have this house or feel that like they're better than me. This is what I've felt over and over observing these people.
Oh yeah, that's
I
very
wrote
true.
on
I
that
can notice similar things here.
Islam is the religion of envy. This is what I think.
Yeah, good one, honestly. It is of internal policing and envy. Those two things can drive a lot because it plays on
Totally.
people's fear and guilt while claiming to be
Yeah.
the most superior, flawless
Yeah.
way of life
Yeah,
possible.
absolutely. But also, if you cannot allow yourself to have all these pleasures these people have here in the West, they are wearing bikinis, they're drinking alcohol, they're having fun, they're dancing and celebrating and etc., etc., etc. But it's all wrong, and you cannot have it. You can't. So that creates envy. That's if there is one situation that creates envy, then this.
That also
Yeah.
creates a lot of hypocritical Muslims who
Yeah.
bend their rules of halal and haram to
Oh,
acceptable and
yeah.
what's forbidden.
Absolutely. So it is an explosive mix. And this is why I agree with some politicians here in Germany who say that Islam and its, let's say, classical form, which is quite conservative, is not compatible with Western values. It is not. Let's look at it. I give you an example. If you live with someone who's all the time on a diet and you eat the whole time ice cream and whatever you want, he'll hate you if you're around.
Yeah.
That's simple.
No, and I concur. I think Islam fundamentally is at loggerheads with the West unless there is some serious reform. But in the middle of that, you get all of these Muslims operating at various levels of cognitive dissonance, hypocrisy, bending the rules, cherry picking, which I'm not saying is a bad thing because, hey, if their envy is that much and they feel like a drink, I wouldn't miss out on all this fun. Sorry, who doesn't want to dance and wear what they want and have a drink now and then? Of course. Going back to
Yeah,
Islam sucks the joy out of life. It's so rigid. And when
rigid.
you, yeah. And then you see how people in the West live and they're not keeling over or it doesn't seem like they might burn in hellfire necessarily. People want to obviously dabble and partake. And either
Mhm.
you turn inwards and, as you said, the envy turns into sheer bitterness and hatred.
Oh,
And you really end up resenting the Western culture. And then you go as far as to say, like, Sharia for the West and things like that to think that you can fix the ills of their
oh,
society, or you end up being a closeted moderate Muslim of your own kind that is secretly dabbling in things that he or she likes.
oh
But
yes.
then Maral, did you ever get influenced by your parents slightly, like even just by the label, taking on the Muslim identity again?
No, it was really weird to me and it alienated me from my parents for a brief period. I cannot explain why, but from a very early age, even in pre Islamic Republic Iran, when I saw Muslims, practicing Muslims with the chadors or the conservative Muslims, I always felt it had something really retrogressive and, I don't know, primitive. I just found that it is a very primitive ideology because it doesn't help. And this is, I couldn't articulate it, of course. I was a little child, but every bit of my soul felt that it wouldn't give me what I need as a being to evolve, to be what I'm supposed to be, particularly as a woman. It is for both, for men and women, terrible, but particularly for women. And
Absolutely.
yeah, I saw a video. It was recently it was an interview with you, and you mentioned you were speaking about how it was also about women, no, about the disrespect, the misogyny, and how these men are raised to disrespect and abuse women. And I wanted to mention this because it came to my mind. But this is this self-perpetuating loop. The women raise these men who abuse them. And it goes on. It's so evil. It's this entropy creates its own entropic system. It's crazy. And I
Yeah.
feel it's an ideology that cannot die because it's obvious to reform. You cannot reform it. It claims to be perfect. It claims to be the last word of God. It claims that humans cannot interpret it. Only God knows Allah knows what the interpretation is. And then on top of it, it claims that humans are not fit enough to understand it, basically, to judge also. They're not fit enough to judge. So that's why there are 4 books, which basically with instructions how to live, starting with how you wash yourself, what you eat, what you wear. Every little bit of Muslim life is regulated in these books. So it's crazy. It blows my mind that people still follow this.
In a way, as you said, it's like the perfect self perpetuating cycle because everything that it traps women in this cycle of and men who perpetuate it is governed by the fear of the afterlife, and then
Yeah,
it's governed by divine justice and divine commands, which, as you rightly mentioned, are timeless and flawless, and we're
yeah,
just measly lowly creatures who can
yeah.
never even understand the will of God or why he set things out in that way. And all you're meant to do is go on this path and attain heaven, which comes at the cost of every self
Yeah,
respecting cell in your body to do. Yet that
yeah.
has captured people's minds and hearts to such a degree that you look at beautiful countries like the country that you hail from, Iran, the country that I come from, originally Pakistan, and you just see that, wow, have these people completely got amnesia about what their
Completely.
country was like pre Islam, or just other cultures and other pluralistic ways of life that
Absolutely.
once governed them before Islam came and they were Arabicized in a sense. And we started changing words like in Pakistan, people don't say things like Khudafiz anymore. It's all Allah Hafiz. It's not even Ramzan, it's Ramadan. And everything has become more and more Arabized over. Yeah, that people actually get annoyed if you hear, if they say, no, Allah Hafiz. And it's almost like superimposed itself again recently over the last like 30 odd years. And you
Wow.
just think this country is getting more and more fundamental and doubling down on the Arabization that came with Islam, which is really sad to see because so many people, I honestly consider it like a mind virus at this point that has captured them in the same way that I'm sure you see this whole leftist allegiance with
Wow.
Islam that we'll also get into.
It blows my mind totally. It's
Yeah,
it's unbelievable how what a risk they also take, because what if it's all, and it is, I believe, it's all bullshit. What then? So you waste your life, throw everything out of the window, your precious life, you have only one, for nothing? Because some dude 1,400 years ago just invented something. It's insane.
exactly. It's insane. It's also hella depressing to think that even when I look back at how many generations of my family have probably spent their life bowing up and down 5 times a day, died with saying the Shahada of Islam, obviously the bearing witness that there is no God but Allah, la di da, just because bearing witness to that apparently again helps you get into heaven. And some people spend their whole lives worrying about, when I die, do you think I would be like have the presence of mind to be able to say that? Imagine your entire life you're worried about saying a final line of a death cult that has got you trapped from your birth till your death. I'm not sure if it's the same in Iran, but like in countries like some of the South Asian countries, if you're born a Muslim, some elder from the family, usually you're an elder male, like a grandfather or someone, the first thing they do as you're a newborn child is to whisper the call to prayer in your ear. So they have this saying where your life begins with the call to prayer and it ends when everyone finishes that prayer for you
Oh,
and you've said the final utterance of the Shahada. And I'm like, there is, you cannot get more cult like than this. This is,
yeah.
it just captured you at every level. It's such a totalitarian, I don't even like to call it a religion anymore, but totalitarian ideology.
It's possession. It's purely
Absolutely.
it's possession, in my view. And it's absolutely inhuman and against, I would say it's against God. Because God is, to me, God is consciousness. And consciousness evolves only through experience, free will. That's how we evolve. And Islam is the opposite of it. You don't evolve. You
Yeah.
can't have an experience as consciousness. You don't have free will. You cannot choose. So it is
I think
absolutely,
that's sorry, I was going to say, I think that's important because when you said earlier that growing up as well, you thought wearing the veil or, sorry, the whole shebang, let's say, like from head to toe,
yeah.
the chador, as you say in Iran, but like that is not going to lead to any kind of fulfillment or self actualization for yourself. Because I've noticed a lot of people that are they do believe in this general like spiritual consciousness and like the evolution of every single human to come to this self-actualization and fruition. Islam, even dogmatically, if you read what it prescribes, it is the antithesis of a
Yes.
human making steps towards that. Like you can it is the opposite, as you said, wash your hands 3 times this way, step into this door with this foot, did
Yeah.
I say this 3 times before you do something, cover up, no music, no poetry, no that, it's just, it
But it
suppresses you on
isn't.
all fronts.
It is. And if you look at it from through a psychological lens, which we should, because everything is man-made, right? In my view, everything is man-made in this reality. So it's a set of ideas, coded ideas, man-made, and very narcissistic ideas. It's about coercive control. So it is, everything is created to capture, to possess the human, to prevent you from thriving, literally, to control you. That's what it is. And it is it is a tragedy that 2 billion people in the Middle East, such a beautiful region of our planet, are living this self-imposed suffering. It is masochistic.
Yeah, I completely agree. So
Actually, it's
Maral, you went on
sadomasochistic.
to, and you can answer this with a simple,
Yeah,
sorry, I was going to say you can answer this with a simple yes or no if I'm
yeah,
completely wrong here. But did
yeah.
your wanting to study media art and become like a sound engineer, did that have any bearing on any of the way you were feeling or your upbringing, or was it just what you thought you'd end up doing? Give it a try.
It was more, I was a very different person at the time. I didn't care so much about these questions or about politics, and I wanted to have fun. I
Okay,
just
nice.
wanted to
I
be
love that.
cool. I just wanted to be cool and I just wanted to have fun. And after a while, I started realizing that the art and music scene often lacks political, cultural, and theological literacy. And it's very shallow. So it wasn't enough. And my interests changed. The older I got, the more I wanted to live a meaningful life, to be useful. And it was okay to live an egotistical life, selfish life, and yeah, to it was a hedonistic life, but now it's time to be useful.
I love that. I'm glad you got your hedonism out of the way. We all need a bit of that. Oh my gosh. No, you're definitely super cool still. So
Thank
I
you.
think this side of what you do has made you even cooler. But let's dive into how you've decided to enact what you just said. From my understanding of what I've heard from you, but if you can break it down to my audience, something essentially happened. I'm very well aware of this incident, and obviously you are, because I'm sure it was the ultimate catalyst. But basically, I think I'm talking about Mahsa Amini.
Yeah,
And yeah, so Mahsa Amini, for those of you that don't know, was an Iranian woman, Kurdish Iranian woman, who was murdered for not covering her hair properly, literally showing two strands of hair when she
yeah,
was on holiday visiting Tehran for the first time. And the entire world watched as Iranian women, your sisters, Maral, took to the streets, burning scarves and chanting for the freedom that, sorry to say, the West still doesn't fully grasp. So you became
yeah.
a lot more public, if I'm not mistaken, after Massa Jina Amini's murder. And I know that moment changed something for a lot of people. But what did it do to you? Did it feel like a breaking point or kind of more like the final straw? Just in the
Yeah.
context of, because I know you speak about the oppression of women under Islamic rule.
Yeah.
So, yeah, how did this kind of all come together in your mind? What was Maral thinking? What was Maral going to do now?
That was actually the point I started. eh, As you said, I started my activism, posting about it, and because I realized all these people. It was in 2022, and before that, it was, I don't know when was it. It was 21. The Black Lives Matters. Was it 21 or 20?
I believe so. One of
Yeah,
those, yeah,
but it
around
was
then.
yeah, it was around then. So all these people from the music and art scene who couldn't stop posting about Black Lives Matters went quiet when Mahsa was murdered. You could literally hear the crickets. So this was very shocking to me and to many other Iranians. I spoke about it with many friends. They felt the same. They had the same experience. And these people lack cultural, historical, and theological literacy to understand the context. I don't know what it is. Is it probably is their goal to maintain ideological purity because they they are followers of the post-colonial bullshit theory and consider Israel, for instance, as a white colonial force in the Middle East, which is bullshit, while Israel is the most significant ally of the Iranian people and the only force in the region against the Islamic regime. But these people also, these Black Lives Matter people, they also support the Palestinian cause and Hamas and consider Hamas and the Houthis freedom fighters. So, to maintain their ideological purity, they throw the Iranian women under the bus. That's how morally rotten and twisted they are. There is no other explanation for this behavior. And most of them identify as feminists. It's bizarre.
Yeah.
Yet they support the most entrenched patriarchal and imperialist force of our time, Islam.
Yeah.
And the behavior is not just hypocritical, it's deeply racist. It's known as soft bigotry of low expectations. Like, I think Yasmin Mohammed, she speaks a lot about it. It's this notion that, oh, it's their culture, so it's okay that they're abused. Hijab is their culture, it's fine, not a biggie. But the struggle of the Middle Eastern people is much more important. So it's okay. We cannot betray Hamas for the Iranian women. This is how these people think. It's absolutely absurd. Absurd. And the ideological root of this moral bankruptcy is white guilt, I think. It's an overcorrection. It's
And is that when you felt like you had to step in and set the record straight here and just
yeah,
say it for what it was? That actually, how are you completely missing what is in front of your eyes here, and you
yeah,
choose to be willfully ignorant or silent
yeah,
on a matter which you're meant to essentially be
yeah.
absolute champions of? Make it make
Oh,
sense.
absolutely. And it's not only the Iranian women they throw under the bus, also the LGBTQ community in the Middle East. They don't care at all for these minorities either. They don't care for the Baha'is, they don't care for the Kurds, for the Kurdish women, for the Yazidis who
Yeah,
were burned alive because they refused to become sex slaves, were kidnapped, sold in markets as sex slaves, etc., etc. That's all fine. Slavery is fine. Everything is fine because it's the brown people doing it. They were colonized. Now they have the right to do that, but it's just bizarre. Even this whole narrative is bullshit. It's a complete revisionism of history. Yeah, and they lack empathy and moral clarity. Many of them are among the most callous people I have encountered, while they harp on like emotions and yada yada. I'm so empathetic and I'm caring for the Palestinian children, etc., etc. Is of course it's bullshit. So
and
it makes my blood boil.
no, I know, and I actually am so grateful that it does, because we need people like your voices. We need people like you to be angry over this and to hold up a mirror. And obviously, the more of us that there are to do that, coming from that same culture of that brown culture, we can say, actually, no, this is
Yeah,
not okay, and you can't shift that lens or use the bigotry of low expectations to justify this.
yeah,
And I think that's why even just the protests we saw within Iran, where you saw people of all ages, of all kind of ethnic backgrounds as well, come forward, because obviously Mahsa Jina Amini was from more of a Kurdish region, and I
yeah,
think across Iran it was so widespread, the anger directed at the Islamic
yeah.
regime. And it's like, how is the West turning a blind eye to the actual genuine will of the people of Iran themselves? Like, it's easy
Oh,
for you as a woman or a self proclaimed feminist here in the West to defend that, but are you drowning out a real Iranian woman's voice at the expense
absolutely.
of that?
Totally. This is what they do, but they are so unempathetic and self self-absorbed that they cannot empathize and understand or even grasp how it is for a girl that grows up in this patriarchal system, indoctrinated from a very early age to believe that her worth lies in submission, and that these women, they don't choose what to wear, they can't freely decide what to study, what profession they want to learn or follow, or if they want to travel, if they want to become artists, DJs, anything that allows freedom of expression. They won't backpack across continents, dance at Burning Man, or experience a first kiss as a teenager. All these things,
Yeah.
these white women, for them, if I don't know if they can imagine how it is if it was taken away from them. They can't. And these girls will never have a chance to experience these things that are basic parts of the beauty of life. and they are absolutely fine with it. If that's not callousness, I don't know. If that's not immoral, if that's not racist, if that's not white supremacy, I don't know what is.
Touche, absolutely. I could not agree more. And I was actually going to ask you this question, but it seems redundant. But I would just like to get your 2 cents on it, just following on from that, and given the fact that the literal reason that Mahsa Amini died was because of that cloth of oppression or that garb of slavery. And
Yeah.
yet, here we see schools during things that they call cultural enrichment, where people are trying on the hijab and they're considering it culture, respecting it, and saying everyone has a free and fair choice. So, what would you say to those in the West who downplay or even go as far as to romanticize the hijab enforcement as just cultural?
These people are absolutely oblivious to the suffering of women. They believe it's a choice. It's as if they just grow up organically and without any pressure. And just when they turn 18, boom, oh, all right, I want to wear the hijab. It's insane. I don't know what they think or if they even think. And this is what I mean with ideological purity. It's very easy. They just justify and twist and turn everything to just yeah, it's about justifying their beliefs, their stupid belief system. So that's why, because anyone who can think, anyone who is aware can see that that it's wrong to put someone under a black cloth when they turn 7, 8, or 9. Often they put them even earlier under the cloth, earlier than 9, because they want them to get used to it. It's
Yeah, oh my God.
insane. How can this be okay for a feminist? I don't know. It's an insult to feminism, these people.
I'm so glad that you actually said that, because I feel like here, when I beat that drum all the time, and saying
Yeah,
something as merely truthful as that in the West can deem you Islamophobic, or like we're the weird ones for saying this, despite the fact that
yeah,
we know what happens behind closed doors. There's even videos circulating around these men from various Islamic backgrounds, Egyptian, Saudi, Algerian, Pakistani, whatever, saying what they would do to their respective partners or mothers or sisters if they even thought about removing the hijab. So few and far between, you'll get some cases where it's absolutely genuinely a choice. Even then, I would question it. But
yeah.
it's definitely not the way
No,
that
no, no.
these feminists in the West believe it to be.
Yeah.
So I'm really glad that you said that.
Yeah, but it is. This is why I feel it's so racist and immoral, because feminism is about helping each other. Feminism is about sisterhood, but also equality. So their feminism is not about equality. Good human rights for them, and less okay, I don't know, inferior
An
human
inferior
rights.
set of rights.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. For thee. That's how they treat their sisters in the Middle East. And this is absolutely not acceptable. These people are immoral, deeply
Yeah.
immoral.
And as you rightly mentioned as well, to go as far as to completely ignore the plight of, in this modern day and age, women of a
Yeah,
certain group, Yazidi women, are being
yeah,
taken as sex slaves into, they're literally recreating markets from the time of the Prophet and those kind of ages on how the Arab slave markets used to be. And they are mockingly disparaging about these Yazidi women, that they've treated this way.
yeah,
And again, we hear absolutely zilch from the West, and you think, how could anyone who actually says they care about women's rights be quiet on that kind of issue just because it doesn't fit your narrative? Or,
yeah,
as you said, all of those other really, I'm sorry to say, in my mind, very feeble reasons to stay quiet, because it just shows where truth actually matters to you, as opposed to seemingly being less hurty words or racist, which again is racist in of itself.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. It is absolutely racist and they are oblivious to it. They feel like they are moral narcissists. They feel totally righteous.
Yeah.
And when you speak with them, the arguments are it's always the same affirmations about moderate Muslims means moderate Islam, etc., etc. Not all Muslims are radical, and hijab can be feminist. Even I've
Gosh.
heard bullshit like that. Hijab can be feminist.
Oh my word.
Yeah, yeah, it's
Goodness.
crazy.
Every time you think there's not a new law that could be
Yeah,
used as a means of justification, it comes out from these kind of people. But Maral, do you, given everything that we've just talked about in the context of Iran, as somebody who left Iran again because of certain circumstances, again, do you ever feel survivor's guilt? I know it was through no control of your own and you were just swept away with your parents, but do you feel a certain element of survivor's guilt, or do you feel an extra call to be the voice of the voiceless or speak on behalf of those who don't have those rights at the minute?
I rather feel obliged to speak up, as you said, for those who don't have a voice, who are trapped in either in countries like Iran, Afghanistan, Pakistan, or who are oppressed here in our democracies. There are hundreds of thousands of women here living among us without basic human rights. And we have to speak up for them. And we have to push until they become really truly visible. It's I was speaking with a friend recently about it. They always bring up the freedom of religion as an excuse for these oppressions, these forms of religious barbarism within a democracy. And the German constitution contains freedom of religion is number 4, and then there is number 1 and number 3, which clearly define that no one should be discriminated against because of based on their gender. And I feel like people have to understand one is not possible without the other, and they haven't grasped it yet. You can't have freedom of religion when you oppress women and impose gender apartheid. You can't do that. You can't have it. And in fact, human rights are above religious freedom.
Yeah.
Humans have rights, ideas don't.
Exactly. And I think that's why you see, and that's why I alluded to the fact that it's very rare that I get to speak to a woman who comes from a background like mine or yours, where you grow up in a Islamic environment and then you manage to break away from it. Not only do you manage to ideologically so emancipate yourself mentally, but then to have
Yeah,
enough of a, I guess it does take a certain level of cojones, but also enough of a kind of safety net to be able to speak about it without certain consequences coming your way, or being able to take the risk to do. And I just think that even statistically, it's a lot like more likely for men to leave religion, including a rigid one like Islam, than it is for women. And
oh,
I understand that
absolutely.
obviously, yeah, and you can see why when it comes to a religion like Islam. With women, there's a number of reasons that they need or want to stay in the fold because usually they have a lot more to lose. But
Oh,
as
yeah.
you said, once you take that the barrier of oppression away, then you do give them this safe space to open the floodgates to question, to feel empowered to even question, or
Yeah.
think of a life in what seems to them like a parallel universe, maybe with no hijab, maybe making a decision for themselves, what they'd like to study, who they'd like to marry, if they'd like to marry, maybe explore their sexuality if that's what it is. But all of these things at the moment are completely a write off to those women.
Yeah.
And I know I unfortunately use the term cojones, which is not very empowering anyway, but in terms of the courage it takes, yeah,
Yeah.
I feel silly now I use that, but such is the current state of the language we use. But yeah,
It's true.
so I do want to also acknowledge the fact that even though you and I are both sitting here in the West today, let's be real, speaking the truth here in the West can be just as exhausting, just in a
Oh,
different way,
yeah.
especially when you're confronting the kind of like liberal hypocrisy that wants to seem progressive, but then,
Yeah.
as you mentioned earlier, they won't touch Islamism or Islam with a 10-foot pole. So I
Yeah.
know, Maral, you've called out that hypocrisy head on. I think that's why I instantly became a fan of yours when I saw one of your posts on X, formerly Twitter, that I could not help but retweet. And I wanted to ask you about that, the weird alliance between the Western left and the Islamist movements. Why do you think that's happening, and why is it so damn hard to get people to admit that it's dangerous?
Yeah, I think both movements have a deep aversion to national identity. That's what unites them. The left is highly influenced by postmodernism and postcolonialism, et cetera, these actually outdated ideas, which promise freedom of guilt through dissolution, the white guilt, with dissolution, no norms, judgment, or cultural superiority. Of course, this is irresistible for a culture that desperately tries to escape its past. You see what I mean? Like colonialism, and in Germany, it is their Nazi past. Instead of erasing guilt, but that's the problem, postmodernism outsources it. It replaces it through relativism. What I mean with it is if all cultures are equal, then no one can be blamed. If all truths are subjective, then no one can be defended. If all identities are fluid, which is a huge part of it, then national identity becomes outdated and dangerous. And this is very dangerous because this is actually where Islam and this left ideology converges. Islam, and you know that original Islam is a supranational project. It denies national identity and rejects customs, secularism, ethnic traditions. They Arabize the entire Middle East. So they want just an ummah. That's what they want. And the ummah is ruled by Sharia law. That's what they want, global ummah. I believe this is where they converge, and the left is completely oblivious to the fact. And we Iranians know that because we saw what happened with the left in Iran once Khomeini seized power. Thousands and thousands were executed. Is the Islamists aren't their friends. They don't understand it. They will kill them. But both, ultimately, to wrap it up, both erase the identity of national self-determination and demand submission to a higher abstract moral order. For the left, it's a global humanity, and for the Islamists is the will of Allah. So I believe it's something along these lines.
That's really interesting, actually, hearing that perspective from you. It makes a lot of sense. And I wish that sooner, like Iran is a prime example. People like yourself have lived through that alliance and what happens.
Oh, you were cut again. Nuria, you were cut again.
Sorry, yes, I'm back now. Yeah, no, that's really interesting that you say that. And that actually makes a lot of sense when you put it like that. I just wish that people, especially in the West here, they can look at case studies like what happened in Iran and actually learn from this. And as you rightly said, like as soon as the Islamists get control, they are the first ones that they end up turning on, because
Yeah.
that is what people have rightly deemed a very unholy alliance. And as you mentioned, what we see as a byproduct of that is how identity politics and this post-colonial guilt almost, and this whole complex has in the West has failed women in Iran at the moment. Not only in Iran, in Afghanistan, Kurdish women, Yazidi women, all across the board, who just don't fit in that perfect narrative of theirs. So
Absolutely.
I
But it's nothing new. At the time, during the 70s and like in the beginning of the 70s, leftists like Sartre and particularly, it was, went even to Iran was supporting the mullahs, was supporting Khomeini, and he even called, he was writing about it here in the West, publishing articles about it, and calling the Islamists and their ideology political spirituality. That was the euphemism.
Goodness.
Can you
Oh my
imagine that?
gosh.
And completely ignoring what it meant to the minorities, to the women, to the homosexuals, etc. He didn't care. And it is just repeating again, all over again. And we hear the same slogans. At the time, it was also Israel, and the PLO was beating the drums against Israel and against the Shah, and they were calling the
Mhm.
Shah the dog of Israel, a Jew in disguise, etc., etc. So it's just repeating. It's insane.
Yeah, manifesting its ugly
Yeah,
head, that unholy alliance, all around us, and even history glaring them in the face, it just makes no difference.
yeah,
So I want to move on to here's where it gets even more uncomfortable for some people. So you're an Iranian woman, obviously by ethnicity, and yet you very ferociously support Israel and called it the Middle East's best hope for peace.
yeah.
And I know there's many like-minded Iranians like yourself
Mhm.
who actually on side with Israel, but in the mainstream narrative, it flips every script we've been fed. So
Yeah.
let's go to this uncomfortable place for a moment. How do you navigate the backlash from both sides, like Islamists and progressives, when you speak honestly about your support for Israel?
What comes to my mind is a Christopher Hitchens moment. So, what I can say to these people is take a number, get in line, and kiss my ass. Because
I love.
these people are anti-Semites, a lot of them, and we always thought, for years we thought anti-Semitism is a right-wing thing, but it is not. If you look at its roots, it takes you back to Soviet Russia, the communists, but also Islamic anti-Semitism. It's all over the Middle East. I would say 90% of the Muslims in the Middle East are anti Semitic. And if you look at the prosecution of the Jews in the Middle East over the last, let's say, century, it's shocking. It's truly shocking. And this only proves the justification for Israel as a state where Jews are safe. So in that regard, I absolutely support the right of Israel to exist. And also, I think, yeah, of course, Iran's only chance to become to free itself from Islamism is Israel in the region. If Israel is gone, the entire region will be Mordor, literally an Islamic Mordor. That's what's going to happen. And the Muslim Brotherhood will take over. And I think right now we have a great chance that Israel takes care of the mullahs and solves the problem for the region. The, Israel is also good for, Israel is very helpful for the peaceful Arab states like the UAE, the Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, etc. They want Israel to exist too. They know what's going to happen if Israel wasn't there. I cannot understand why these Western anti Semites are so oblivious to this fact that if Israel wasn't there, hell would break loose. Literally, hell would break loose. Iran would unite with the Muslim Brotherhood, the Shiite Islamists with the Sunni Islamists. They would unite to destroy everything, and then they would destroy each other. That's what's going to happen. And they are completely oblivious to this fact. But this is what I mean: historical and theological and cultural illiteracy of these people is glaring.
Oh, yes. The amount of untruths and fake
Oh,
news. Thank goodness at one point for community notes because the
Oh yeah,
level of propaganda that,
it's
sorry, but
crazy, right?
Hollywood was churning out. Yes.
It's
My
insane.
goodness.
And they make up stories, they repost pictures of dead children from Syria and claim it was Israel. It's insane. And the propaganda,
Misinformation, disinformation. They've got hired actors in some
yeah,
places,
yeah, they
you
got
know.
actors, but also the historical facts are speak for itself. There is a mosque built on a Jewish temple. So how, how is how does it make sense that Israel or the Jewish people are the colonizers? And
And don't shy away from saying, we will never stop until we cleanse the Jews from this land, and Jerusalem is the capital of
it's,
Palestine. What
but
do
it
you
is not a
expect?
land dispute. I don't
Yeah.
believe it's a land dispute. It is truly a religious conflict, and it was. We have to go back and to the inception of the Palestinian cause, basically, which was in the 60s, and they signed the chapter of not Hamas, the PLO chapter. They signed it in Moscow with the KGB. KGB picked 400 Palestinians. There were Jordanians and Egyptians, Egyptians from Gaza, Jordanians from West Bank, brought them, flew them in to Moscow. They signed this chapter, and then what's his name? Yasser Arafat, this fucking con artist, Egyptian con artist. He wasn't even born in Gaza. He was born in Egypt. And he became a billionaire through this cause. His daughter inherited billions. And the same with the Hamas leaders. They became billionaires. They amassed some crazy 12 billion or something. All the aid money that was funneled through UNRWA. It's insane. This needs an entire video.
Oh, yeah.
A discussion only about this, but it is insane that people are so ignorant of all
Mm.
these facts. And also, the worst thing for me was, and that was the moment I knew I will speak up, was the reaction of all these feminists and activists to the rape and murder of the Jewish women, of the Israeli women. These people were you're talking about party goers, just festival kids visiting a festival, and they were raped and mutilated while they were filming themselves. These terrorists, they filmed everything with body cams, they put everything online, and they still refuse to believe it, these morons. It's crazy.
That was the tipping point for me as well. I wasn't even all clued up about the entire historicity of how this conflict had unfolded. This has been going on since way before I was born. And
Yeah,
then again, growing up in the Middle East, I was only told one side of it, which was Free Palestine from Israel. Israel is the biggest culprit known to man.
yeah.
But seeing the reaction from people, seeing justification
Oh yeah.
of what we saw,
Great.
that literally morale made me sick to my stomach. I could not believe people out there could even go as far as to use words like rapers resistance,
Oh
or freedom
yeah.
fighters, or I'm sorry, there are actual monsters who want one side completely wiped off the face of the earth.
These people, this neighborhood, they were actually leftists. They were, a lot of them were helping the Palestinians. They were driving them to hospitals. They were giving them jobs. That's why they knew all the houses, because they were working. A lot of the terrorists were working there, or they got the maps from people who were working there. That's crazy. And we all know the story of baby Kafir. So the Bibas family, the story of the Bibas family was tore me apart. I couldn't imagine what kind of human being could do this to babies, to strangle babies, wrap their hand around the neck of a baby and squeeze the life out of little babies. what monster would do that? And yet, still, these Palestine mob defends these
No, you can't
atrocities.
defend the
Still.
indefensible. I'm sorry. You absolutely cannot defend the indefensible like that. And it makes you really think like what kind of allegiance or ideology makes them embrace such an inhumane way of looking at the world that you can literally defend monstrosities like that. Exactly.
Pathological, truly, because a normal human being, everyone who saw the pictures of these little babies, but also the pictures of these girls with blood-stained pants and
Yeah.
beaten and raped.
And
How
Shani
can you
Luke's
be so
body on the back of
callous?
a.
Yeah.
Yeah.
and
They
and
were
and yeah, Shani
laughing.
Luke, completely distorted body, all her bones were broken, and they were sitting there, and then they drove her through, I don't know, was it Khan Yunis, or they drove her through Gaza, and they were beating on her corpse and spitting on her corpse. It's a moral collapse. It's complete
Sick.
moral collapse. Is sick. This is why I cannot sympathize with these people. Sorry.
Mm.
And all these polls showed that they would still elect Hamas. They were still, even those who didn't like Hamas, they said what Hamas did to the Jews was okay. So this is a culture of death, and this is unacceptable. It can only be eradicated. And these people, whoever is left there, they need utter, complete, fundamental denazification. Seriously.
Oh, yes. Maral, because you are so vocal now on these matters, and these are probably two of the most controversial things you can talk about, and as a woman, hold a strong opinion about Islam for the ideology that it is, then take a stand against the pro Palestine crowd and speak the truth according to how you see it. Have you received death threats or hassle or ever been afraid, given that you're now a lot more vocal?
No, I'm not afraid. It's Look, I can't do anything about it. I can't censor myself out of fear because this ideology thrives on fear.
Oh, yeah.
That's how it works. And I don't feel anything can happen to me. I'm not afraid. I speak my truth, and this is you do the same. You do the same. You live with a risk. I speak my truth, and I don't think about it. But what I wanted to mention, I forgot to mention it, and it's important to wrap up this Israel part.
Sure.
It's why I'm so vocal about Israel is also because I've seen what the pillars of the Iranian, the Islamic regime are. The Islamic regime, this entire system rests on three pillars. One is subjugation of women, one is anti Semitism, and the third one is hatred of the West, particularly America. So these are the foundations of this Islamist ideology. And that means, of course, we have to support. They can only be good if they are such a threat to the Islamists. They can only be good.
That's a very good point. And for people who have come from a similar background to you and I, we can see the wood for the trees. We actually can. And so I might get backlash from it for saying it, and I have lost friends and lost people close to me because I took a side. And
Oh,
that
yeah.
for me was, I'm sorry to say, but I think October 7th, under any circumstance, was not justifiable in terms of raise my voice for Palestinians. I can only empathize on a human level, but I'm not going to actively defend people who would vote for and want to keep in power monsters who are capable of the very thing that we saw on October 7th. And you and I both know exactly what their charter says. We know exactly what their worldview demands of them, and we've seen it enacted. And it really ties into those three pillars that you mentioned. There is no way that you can concede on any of those three things. And that's what we see manifesting when you do start using slogans like rape is resistance or freedom fighters. But the reason I wanted to even touch on this topic is because certain institutions here in Western Europe have been so infiltrated that they're literally doing an understudy of Hamas and using words like one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter to
Oh,
deliberate on their actions. And to me, that is just beyond wild. Like, how have we got to this point? So,
because
yeah.
they have started infiltrating the West after 9/11. They started infiltrating the West, and with the West, Western academia, Western art, all the institutions, and on top they had in America particularly they had academics like Said, who was propagating and preaching, literally preaching these toxic postmodern and postcolonial theories and spreading them. And then Iran adapted this concept of ideological subversion from Russia, from Soviet Russia. And that's what they deployed. They had their academics, and I think they started with sending students over who then later became the academics. So it's now the fourth generation. And they indoctrinate the students now for a decade. They have been indoctrinating, and look at higher education in the UK is the same. Look at Oxford is the same. And where do you get the most out of your investment? Of course, in education, because you literally breed what you want to destroy a society. And what they do, oh, this was so interesting. And I recently came across a promotional video of CARE, is this Muslim, is an organization in America. CARE?
No, I haven't heard of them actually.
Oh, yeah, it's interesting. Look it up.
Mhm.
It's a
Okay.
Muslim organization in America. They represent American Muslims. Yeah. And in this video, they were bragging about how they incentivize young Muslims as young as 13 and 15 to aspire a career in politics and study law. Da, 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 da. And this is what they have been doing for decades here in the West. And you see it also. Look at the how many mayors, Muslim mayors, you have in the UK,
Oh, yeah.
and we have the same here in Germany too. We have more and more very problematic, anti-Semitic Muslim politicians infiltrating the political
Mhm.
system, the political sphere, and the. And I'm not going to start with academia; it's full.
Oh, yeah.
So that's where it comes from. It's ideological subversion. You can look into the work, the lectures of Yuri Bezmenov. He
Mm.
was a KGB agent who gave a
Yeah.
lot of lectures in the 80s and end of 80s and 90s about how this subversion, ideological subversion works, and how the KGB was deploying it here in the West for decades. And they have been successful if you look at the results. They have been. So we have this ultra left communist, almost communist ideology that has been proliferating throughout the West, and the Islamists doing the same.
Absolutely.
It's a disaster.
Yeah, and then as a result, as you said, institutions across the board are now captured. So if you go through the current system as it is, you will come out brainwashed with this insane post colonial guilt, if you will. You have a very tunnel vision, revisionist view of history as we know it. You will, by
Yeah.
virtue of the lectures you've been taught and the things you've heard, every single major UK university, the top ones, Russell Group and Oxford and Cambridge, all the London ones have Palestine encampments within their campuses. And you speak to 99.9% of the students there, it's the same narrative. And you think these are meant to be the sharpest, brightest minds that society is supposedly churning out. These are meant to be our future prime ministers, our politicians, our policymakers, and they don't even have enough critical wherewithal to think for themselves or even view the historical record as it should be.
Yeah.
So we've got a massive problem on our hands if this is what we have done to the current and future generations. And I just think
Yeah.
with all of that, plus the rise in Islamism and this unholy alliance we talked about, the future of the West looks extremely precarious to me.
It is. And the worst is about these people, they are fundamentally anti Western values. They completely reject, they want to replace, they consider everything white and flawed, basically. It's all post colonial and flawed. It doesn't have a right to exist. So they want to replace everything with something, no one knows what, something.
Oh, yeah.
Communism, no,
Communism, yeah,
yeah,
Marxism, anarchy.
are inherently anti Semitic. That's really, yeah, glaring. I don't know how we could let it get that far in Germany, the Germany, where it comes from.
Literally,
They
Germany.
literally standing on piles and piles of Jewish bones. How could you let that happen? Or how could you let that, how you say, it's not even resurrected, it's just revived.
Yeah, I saw a post where a woman in Berlin was standing in one of these recent evenings on top of a Holocaust memorial and doing the Nazi salute.
Yeah. Yeah, it would have been unthinkable a few years ago. It would have been unthinkable, unthinkable. And I don't know
My word.
if they will do something about it because she was wearing a hijab, or if it's okay if a woman with a hijab does it. I don't know. At this point, anything is possible, but it is
Mm.
outrageous and it is obscene.
I'm really glad that there are people like yourself calling it out though, because this is the kind of conversations, the kind of topics that just divide people. Everything becomes so polarized and, sorry to say, but very toxic, extremely toxic to discuss, to the point where even I've tried to stay clear of the conversation to a large degree, because people who you thought you knew your whole life can all of a sudden just turn on you, or you realize that actually this
Oh,
whole
yes.
anti-Semitism thing runs a lot deeper than I once thought, and it was a lot for me to process. I just thought of it more like as an abstract concept within Islam. I didn't see
Yeah.
it in a very lived way that I did when
Mm.
this conflict broke out and post October
Yeah.
7th, and in the general lingo that people use and people close to you, people around you, and you think, wow, this is
Yeah.
extremely problematic. And yeah, it came as a massive shock to me, because before that I'd only theoretically heard of it on paper, in the Islamic context. I hadn't really seen it.
But the Islamic context isn't entirely Islamic anymore. There was this Islamic, I looked a little bit into it. There was always, and it is embedded in the scripture, Islamic
Mm.
anti Semitism. We know that. We know the concept of jizya and the tax Jews had to pay, and they were always subjugated by the Muslims.
Massacres, outright
Yeah.
massacres against Jewish
Yeah.
tribes. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. But what we see now unfolding in the Middle East, particularly in Egypt, Iran, but also in, I believe, Afghanistan or Pakistan isn't any different. It's far more, it's a mix of Western German anti Semitism and this Islamic anti Semitism. It's far more nefarious.
Mm.
You,
Mm.
Have you seen these pictures of shops, like bookshops or poster shops with Hitler pictures and clothing stores called Hitler? And it's insane. It's
Yeah,
like they celebrate Hitler, they adore him all over the Middle East. It's really bad.
it's disgusting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, and we've heard of a resurgence in reading parts of Mein Kampf and quoting Hitler and things he has said about the extermination of Jews. And it's very dark. And as that, this could be another whole episode in itself to talk about because it is nefarious. The
It goes back centuries. And also, I think it is the saying, the canary in the coal mine, when it starts with when anti Semitism, when within a society, anti Semitism research, it's a bad sign. It means it means trouble ahead, big trouble.
yeah,
This is what I,
society is exceptionally ill. Yeah.
yeah, exactly.
So, just to wrap up, Morale, because I could sit and talk to you all, this has been one of the most interesting conversations I've had in a really long time.
Thank
And
you. To me
no,
too. I'm
honestly,
enjoying this conversation very much.
oh, good. I'm so glad. And honestly, despite how dark and then kind of nature of the conversation, I'm still
Yeah,
really just enjoying talking to you, which says something for sure.
we are both great optimists.
Yeah, actually, funny you say that because one of my last questions for you would be what do you hope for your kind of activism now that you've really started to take things up a gear and you are very vocal? And also, as an extension of that, where do you see things headed in the next 5 to 10 years?
I think, as I said, I think the young people are waking up to the actual reality, and they don't want to be subjugated. They don't. They want reciprocity, and they understand that without reciprocity, there is submission only ahead. They don't want that. And I think that's the cure because the resurgence of anti Semitism is also linked to immigration in the West. I think the resurgence of anti Semitism is also closely linked to immigration from Islamic countries. They brought the anti Semitism back to the West. So we have, of course, Western right wing and old Nazis exist, particularly in Eastern Germany, but they are fringe, and they would have never dared to come out of their holes. Now they're all crawling out of the holes with keffiyehs. I think addressing immigration, addressing Islamism, which I see will happen soon. They will have to, otherwise, people will elect very right wing parties and they will take care of it. But I'm afraid they will throw out the baby with the bathwater. The center parties, political parties, they need to step up, they need to get their shit together. This is the political trajectory ahead. I think we have to address Islamism and immigration.
That's really interesting. I think that speaks for what we're seeing across the entire scope of
Yeah.
Europe at the moment. Many countries facing a very similar predicament. That will be the next big thing that will swing elections, swing people's votes, and something's got to give because it's been bubbling to the surface for a while now. I liked your analogy earlier about the tightrope amidst a volcano type situation.
And you know what? What's interesting is these Pali orcs, they could never organize rallies in Saudi Arabia, UAE, or in Bahrain. They would be in prison instantly because they know what it is about. But the credulous Western, white guilt, tormented, I don't know what, idiots, morons, they don't understand what they're dealing with.
Yeah, and these people are they're using your freedoms to turn
Yeah.
them against you essentially. So,
Freedom of assembly is
yeah.
abused, freedom of speech is abused, freedom of religion is abused. It's crazy. They turn our system against us.
There's no right to protest in Saudi Arabia, as you're saying. In fact, I think the UAE actually fines you for waving a Palestine flag.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
how they nip it in the bud. They don't even
yeah.
allow for what we see happening weekend after weekend on the streets of different cities in Germany, in the streets of London. It's
Impossible there.
wild. Yeah,
It's impossible.
absolutely. And Maral, the reason that I'm extra grateful that you agreed to come and talk to me was because it's very rare that I get somebody from your kind of background, which is similar to mine, and that has the courage to come out and speak unapologetically, speak your truth, link it all the way back to Islam, quote unquote scriptures, and verbatim say that the root of the ideology is actually a problem, and when it manifests into politics, we've got a whole nother can of worms to deal with. But it's very rare, and there's few and far between in this little niche corner of YouTube. There's very few women who are openly doing this. So, what would your message, if anything, be to other women like you and me who might not be at this point yet when they feel like they can or they should speak openly? Do you have any message to them about why they maybe should, and if the risk is worth it, and why you feel like you do what you do?
I believe these women, but also the Western women or people who don't want to upset anyone or insult anyone, so they don't speak up. They are uncertain if they can. They want to be PC. We have these people on one side, and then we have the ex-Muslims and minorities from the Middle East on the other side who don't speak up because they are afraid for their lives. I can only say to both of them, if your intention is good, if you have love in your heart, if your intention is making this world better, if you love your fellow human beings, if you care for them, speak up. You can't insult anyone, and you shouldn't be afraid of anyone. If you carry love in your heart, say it and stand by it, and you will see the right people will support you. There, that's the message, and that's exactly what happened to me. I spoke up, and I was instantly attracting the right people. It's This is the nature of energy. Do it.
Damn straight what Morale said. Absolutely. If you care genuinely, or maybe one day you think it's not the right time to speak, or you're worried about the repercussions, one day, just like it might have been Mahsa Jina Amini for Maral, it might have been another triggering factor for me, but one day something will light that match inside you, and you'll realize that it is now your prerogative to speak out. Because if you don't, you're not only doing a disservice to humanity, but most importantly to yourself, because there comes a
Oh,
point after which you cannot remain silent in the face of all this injustice that you see.
yeah, and they
And
should do it for their children.
oh yeah, oh yes, that's a big one for sure. It would be a massive catalyst as to
Yeah.
why I felt the need to do this.
Oh, absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But yeah, other than that, Moral, did you want to say anything else before we wrap up?
I want to thank you and thank your audience for listening if they have made it so far. Conversation. It was delightful. I enjoyed our conversations very much, Nuria. Thank you so much.
It's an absolute pleasure, and this platform is always open to you. I would love for us to do a part two
Yeah.
at some
Yeah,
point.
of course.
Oh,
We will.
amazing. If
Yeah.
anybody has any topics that they heard today that they want to hear more from Maral on, let us know in the comments, and maybe in a few weeks' time we can arrange part two, because today we had a lot to get through. I didn't want to bombard her with questions, but I had so much to unpack. How can people follow you and your work? I will put the links in the description, but if you could just tell people how to
Yeah.
contact you.
I'm on X, I'm on TikTok, I'm on Instagram, and I'm on Facebook. So you can't miss me. I'm everywhere,
Oh,
except
wow.
except YouTube. I have to start a YouTube channel. I will, but except YouTube, I'm everywhere.
Oh my goodness, you
Yeah,
definitely need to start a YouTube channel,
yeah.
please. That's the one social media missing from your
I will.
portfolio.
I will. It's
Yeah.
it's on top of my list. Yes.
Oh, amazing. We look forward to it. I will share your channel far
Yeah.
and wide with my viewers. I'm sure they'll be extremely excited to
Thank
see what
you.
you've got going. You're welcome. So, ladies and gents, as Maral said, thank you so much for listening today. I hope you enjoyed the conversation. I know we did. And once again, I'd like to thank Maral for being here. As I'm sure you've all heard, Maral doesn't really need anyone to give her a platform. She is the platform. She's a woman who speaks louder than silence, stands taller than regimes, and fights harder than fear. So, in a world that keeps asking women to be soft, obedient, invisible, be impossible to ignore, may we all be a little bit more like Morale. May we speak until we're heard. May we heed her words and fight until we're free. On that note, good night from London, ladies and gentlemen. Until next time, bye bye. Take care. If you like these videos and want to support me in my activism, then you can support me on Patreon or PayPal. Stay free, everyone.